So this is just a video, like the name suggests, about synthetic and natural fragrances. Now, I'm not an expert, but this is obviously going to be about my personal kind of experience with them and what I interpretate them as, and the differences and such like. So yeah, I'll get straight into. So obviously the first thing I kind of got to go into, not too much depth, but is what is a natural fragrance to me and what is a synthetic fragrance. Now, as we know, all fragrances really are a mixture of the two in some shape or form. Now, to be classed as a natural fragrance, I believe there has to be a certain percentage of ingredients that hit that point. Now, there are many different definitions, and some companies are dishonest, probably not the word, misleading's not, because of course the main ingredient in perfume is water, alcohol, so clearly that's a natural ingredient, so obviously they get away with it like that. But I suppose what we're kind of talking about is the percentage of the oil content, in my eyes anyway, waffling on. So natural fragrances to me would include natural molecules actually taken from the specific ingredients, not necessarily the actual ingredient is supposed to smell like, because of course in nature some things smell like other things, and things mixed together can give that kind of impression of that particular ingredient we're trying to smell. I'll use, for example, to explain that gobbledygook, strawberries. Now, let's say you're not putting, you could put strawberry molecules, but maybe in nature there are certain things that smell like strawberries. Let's say a snosberry leaf and a goopity goop bit of soil, right? And you mix them two together and they coincidentally smell like strawberry. That's still a natural fragrance, isn't it? In my eyes anyway. And synthetics to me are man-made ingredients, such as, I will get more into these, such as cashmere and ambroxan, isoe super, them kind of things, which are created to smell like things, but they are completely man-made and do different things, such as improve the longevity or projection, etc. So, now which do I prefer? I don't have a preference, and I think most fragrances are a good mix of both of them. Maybe I'm starting to get more into natural fragrances, but that's not to say they're better or worse, is it? They're just different. So, yeah, and I'll get into certain fragrances of the type later on. But just to finish this, is specifically going back to naturals, synthetics, things I struggle with are not because necessarily they're bad or chemical is the word, everything's a chemical. It's because I just don't agree with them. Like isoe super, I can't smell. I know it's in a lot of things, but I personally can't pick it up, so what's the point of it to me? Cashmere is another one I mentioned. To me, cashmere is like you've ironed some socks too much, so the nylon and the cotton and that are all hot and stink, all of that kind of weird kind of smell, and it's like they've then been rammed down my throat and I'm choking on them. It's what cashmere does to me, but I understand it adds depth and a warmth to a fragrance, in my opinion. And finally, obviously, the other main one is ambroxan. Ambroxan, again, a great note, there to replace, as far as I'm aware, ambergris. And it's been about for a long time, but sometimes some ambroxans are fine, still smell it a bit, and it's quite enjoyable and, yeah, perfectly brilliantly invented ingredient. However, sometimes I think they use very cheap, scratchy ambroxan, which is like a drill bit to my eyeball and is quite horrific. So yeah, I struggle with certain synthetics, but that doesn't mean that they're bad. It doesn't mean naturals are good. It just means that they're all different, doesn't it? So yeah, I'll get into the fragrances to kind of represent the more of each side of them. Right, thanks folks. So we'll start with the more kind of synthetic smelling ones to talk about first. Let's get it started with the most synthetic fragrance that I own, which bears not much resemblance to, let's say, anything in nature, and that is of course Dupont. Now I'd have to mention this, wouldn't I? Now some people say it smells like cherry cough syrup, some people say it smells like a beautiful sweet bomb. That's my kind of thing of it. I think what it's got in is a lot of synthetic orange blossom, which adds this sweetness, and then the kind of the cherry note or whatever, I think possibly comes from the heliotrope, you know, where it's that kind of almondy thing, and that kind of creates that kind of cherry feel, doesn't it? And I think actually it doesn't smell like anything you smell in nature, and probably doesn't include too many natural ingredients. However, like we all know, it is easily one of my favourite fragrances. It's very loud, very bombastic, and very over the top, but I do love it. So yeah, that's the first one. Next on the list, excuse the noise from the chav in the background, is Quetzale from Daniel Hossier. Now I've picked this one specifically because it's a nice mix of naturals and synthetics. Well, obviously some of the synthetics create these beautiful fantasy notes, like there's like avocado and chili in it, and the certain spices, because it's tried to recreate a time that was hundreds of years ago, back in ancient Mexico, before Europeans arrived there. So it's tried to recreate these magical, mystical smells based on information and that is where things like synthetic notes are wonderful. The science and the brilliance behind them, to be able to create an image in our mind of things that we're not entirely sure about, but it does actually recreate that, like you are literally like the first Europeans stepping foot in Central America and smelling all these wonderful things that we've imagined in our mind for the first time. So that's Daniel Hossier's Quetzale. And last is a mixture of where synthetics and naturals are used together to create something that is wonderfully naturally smelling, and that is Killian's Imperial tea. This smells like every single facet and aspect of a cup of jasmine tea. It's got the right amount of the slight bitterness, it's got the smell of the tea, the flowers themselves, beautifully clean, crisp and white, and it is literally like just having a sip of this tea. It also has this effect of being fresh and calming, like a real jasmine tea is, as well as slightly warming you up inside, and it's transportative. But what's so impressive about it, as I say, is obviously it's a mixture of the two. I imagine there's quite a lot of natural jasmine, and quite probably a lot of natural tea in it, but there's things like the musks and such like that kind of elevate it and just make it perfect and make it like literally photorealistic, and that again is the power of synthetics. So on to the naturals. Now this brand I've spoken about a lot, and I'm going to pick a fragrance that isn't actually my favourite, and it's one I struggled with, but I think it's a masterpiece, and that is Irresistible. Get it? Irresistible? But yeah, it's all around the note of iris. Now in it are other things such as jasmine and other florals to kind of give it more, but what it opens with is this really rooty clay, acky, bitter orris. The root, literally what I am, well, given it uses real orris, it will be exactly what the orris smells like. This quite dank, hard to like kind of, you know, yeah, kind of ingredient. But as it develops that kind of what we recognise more as iris, and it uses the kind of different facets of it. It's got that kind of waxy feel, it's got a bit of a powdery feel, it's got the the fantasy kind of floral smell about it, you know, which is what we're almost used to, the kind of cosmetic-y feel to it, which I believe, not necessarily in this fragrance, but I believe that cosmetic-y smell we're used to in makeup, so I've heard. Not an expert, not quoting people, these people weren't scientists. It's mainly actually made from violet flower mixing with the kind of irisy kind of thing. So yeah, so there's some bit of information for you that might not be true. So yes, Irresistible is my first kind of favourite natural fragrance from April Aromatics. The next up is a fragrance that I absolutely adore, and it's a new kind of brand I discovered this year. It's called One Way Bridge Perfumes, which I've spoken about a lot and will be speaking about very soon, more in depth. But it's a New Zealand based kind of place, and Elise is the owner, and she uses a lot of natural ingredients. But some of these natural ingredients that she uses are not familiar to my nose as a Northern Hemisphere European kind fella. There's a lot of fauna and plants and flowers that grow in New Zealand that don't grow up here. Simple as. And the fragrance I've picked for that is Polly. Now, Polly is the greenest of greens. Again, it's not perhaps my favourite from the line, but I do love it and I do really appreciate it. It's actually a green fragrance I really do adore. And it's kind of this mixture of grasses, wild flowers, you know, mosses growing on rocks, greenery and shrubbery that grows around the stream. So all these kind of beautiful green natural elements that come together that create kind of, again, a very photorealistic impression of what I imagine New Zealand to smell like, especially with the slightly unusual things, because there would be things that are quite alien to me. So yeah, that's Polly from One Way Bridge. Finally is a fragrance called Agar Akhlee from Demi-Niche, from the nose of Ricardo Ramos, who kind of is recreating his experience in India. And the reason I love this one so much, I won't go on because it's got to be brief, is it's quite narcissus heavy mixed with oud, and it creates this kind of image of what these forests in India would be like, and must be quite amazing. And narcissus it's not used very often, not often enough anyway, and it is such a unique kind of beautiful floral, isn't it, of being not sweet. It can go quite sweet again, but in my head that's more kind of our daffodils that we have. It was kind of the sharper floral, kind of whitey yellow, green kind of thing in your head. Oh, look at that, can you see that? You can't probably see that. The Death Star in the sky. But yes, it's very natural smelling. Uses quite a lot of natural ingredients in it, and it perfectly again recreates a part of the world that I've never been to and may never well visit. So yeah, the power of natural. So that was just a quick brief kind of run through some of my favourites from each side, and to give a more kind of balanced thing, because I don't think there is a wrong or right, and I think as long as perfumery continues on, both will exist. I mean, the issue with naturals nowadays is obviously IFRA, and that's there to protect us. Do you know what I mean? It's there to protect people not getting weird reactions, etc, etc. And also, another thing to think about with naturals is obviously sustainability, but that's not hard to be sustainable, is it? Just put back what you take. Not hard. But a lot of these big agglomerations perhaps are not the best at doing that, are they? Profit, but that's another thing. So yeah, I think there'll always be a nice mix of them. And I also suspect the synthetic kind of molecules and things we're used to will get better and better over time, because they're going to have to, aren't they? I mean, again, I'm no expert with this, but I know from my own personal experience with ambroxan, for example, in a cheap 20 quid designer fragrance with lots of ambroxan, don't get a headache, it doesn't cut through my brain. Yet with a very expensive niche fragrance with lots of ambroxan in, yeah, I get quite a reaction. Now what does that tell you? It doesn't matter on the company and what the specific thing they're using is. It depends on the quality of that specific molecule or whatever. And just because something's very expensive doesn't mean they're using the best molecules available, does it? But anyway, what about yourselves? Do you prefer naturals or synthetics, or do you prefer a nice mix? Where do you see the perfume world going? Are the synthetics you think you struggle with, or are the ones that you can struggle with but don't in other ones? Again, suggesting the difference in quality of ingredients. But yeah, thanks for watching. Quite brief, I know, but interesting discussion, isn't it? Alright folks, bye.